14 days alone, in a room, waiting for a test result. No visitors, no explanations. Just you, 4 walls, and a lock on the outside of the door. Tonight, I'm telling you 3 stories, sent to me by 3 different people, from 3 different countries, during 3 different waves of the pandemic. None of them know each other. None of them have ever spoken. But when I read their accounts side by side, they described the same sounds, the same thing standing at the end of the hallway at 3 a.m.
I'm not going to tell you what it was. I don't think anyone knows. I just know what happened to them. Stay until the end of all 3. The last one is the one that made me stop taking sleeping pills. Let's begin.
I want to start with a story sent in by a man I'll call Daniel. He was 34, working a corporate job in London, when he flew back from a business trip in early 2021 and tested positive at the airport. Under the rules at the time, he wasn't allowed to go home. He was taken, by government transport, no choice given, to a quarantine hotel outside the city. 14 days, mandatory. Door locked from the outside, meals left on a tray in the hallway 3 times a day.
He said the hotel used to be a mid-range business hotel before the government requisitioned it. 400 rooms. During his stay, he said, maybe 60 were occupied. His room was 214.
Were just boring. Gray light through a window that didn't open more than 4 inches, a TV with 12 channels, a phone he wasn't supposed to use except to call the front desk. He told me the silence was the worst part at first. No traffic, no hallway chatter, nothing. Just the hum of the air conditioning, and every few hours, the soft clunk of a food tray being set down outside his door. On the 4th night, he woke up at 3:14 a.m. He remembered the exact time because he looked at his phone first thing, out of habit. What woke him wasn't a sound exactly. It was the absence of one. The air conditioning, which had been running non-stop since he arrived, had gone completely silent. And in that silence, he heard someone breathing on the other side of his door. Not knocking, not talking, just breathing, slow, deliberate, like someone standing very close to the wood, in no hurry at all. He said he lay there for almost 20 minutes, too afraid to move, listening to it breathe. And then, and this is the part he kept coming back to when he described it to me, the breathing changed rhythm to match his. When he held his breath, it held its breath. When he exhaled, shaky and quiet, it exhaled at the exact same moment.
He called the front desk. No answer. He called again. Nothing. On the 3rd call, someone picked up, but said nothing. Just breathing. The same slow rhythm, before the line clicked dead. The next morning, his breakfast tray was outside the door as usual. He asked the delivery staff, masked, gloved, silent as always, if anyone had been on his floor overnight. The staff member just shook her head and left quickly, refusing to make eye contact.
For the next several nights, it happened again, always around 3 a.m., always the breathing. On the 7th night, he worked up the courage to press his eye to the peephole. There was no one there, but the peephole itself was fogged, like someone had been standing close enough to breathe directly onto the glass from outside, which shouldn't have been possible, because the peephole only works one direction. On day 9, he asked a cleaning staff member, in broken conversation through a cracked door, how long the hotel had been used for quarantine. She told him it had opened for that purpose 8 months earlier. He asked if anyone had died there. She didn't answer him directly. She just said, very quietly, 214 was the first room we sealed. He didn't understand what she meant until he checked the room numbers on either side of him during a supervised walk to get tested on day 10. 212 and 216 both had visible new paint around the doorframe. Slightly different shade, slightly newer trim. 214
did not. That night, the breathing came back, except this time, it wasn't at the door. It was inside the bathroom. He said he heard the shower curtain move, not a full pull, just a soft drag of metal rings against the rod, and then the same slow, matching breath from a room he'd locked from the inside. He didn't sleep in that bed again. He pulled the desk chair to the far corner by the window and sat there until sunrise, for the remaining 4 nights, watching the bathroom door. On day 14, they let him go. As he was leaving with his suitcase, he asked the porter, half joking, trying to make light of it, what had happened in room 214 before it became a quarantine hotel. The porter told him the hotel used to be a hospice. Room 214 had been the room reserved for patients in their final 48 hours. Daniel told me he still, to this day, cannot sleep in a hotel room without leaving the bathroom door wide open and the fan running, so he never has to sit in that particular kind of silence again. That story stayed with me for one reason. The breathing that matched his own. Not attacking, not threatening, just present, waiting for something. The second story is different. This one didn't happen in a hotel. It happened in a house. A normal, familiar house, with someone the person thought they already knew. This is the other side of the wall. This account came from a woman I'll call Emma Walker, who was living in a shared apartment with her younger sister in a mid-sized U.S. city in late 2020. When her sister tested positive, the two of them made the decision most families made back then. Rather than risk a shelter or hotel, her sister would isolate in her own bedroom for 14 days, with Emma delivering meals to the door and keeping her distance.
The apartment was small. Their 2 bedrooms shared a single thin wall. For the first week, Emma Walker said everything was normal. In the sad, muted way quarantine made everything normal. She'd knock, leave food, step back, wait for her sister to open the door and take the tray. They'd talk through the door sometimes, voices raised just enough to carry. It was on night 8 that things changed. Emma Walker woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of her sister's voice through the wall. Not talking to her, but talking to someone. A full conversation, back and forth. Emma lay there, confused, wondering if her sister had a video call open, until she realized there was no second voice, just her sister's voice, alone, taking both sides of a conversation, switching tones between the two, one soft and familiar, one flat and strange, like someone reciting lines with no emotion behind them. She knocked. The talking stopped instantly. "Are you okay?" she asked. A long pause. Then her sister's voice, completely normal, completely herself. "Yeah, just watching a show. Sorry." Emma let it go. Isolation does strange things to people, she told herself. But it happened again, the next night, and the night after. Always the same 2 voices, her sister's real voice and the other one. Emma started recording it on her phone through the wall, holding it up against the plaster in the dark, too afraid to knock again. When she played the recording back the next morning, only one voice was on it, her sister's. The other voice, audible clearly through the wall in real time, distinct enough that Emma could describe its cadence in detail, simply wasn't there in the recording. Just her sister, alone, speaking in that flat, wrong tone into empty air, pausing in exactly the places a second speaker would have been responding. On day 11, Emma brought dinner to the door, as usual. Her sister opened it a crack, as she always did, hand out for the tray. But this time, Emma noticed her sister's fingernails. They were bleeding at the cuticles, not cut, not bitten, but pulled, deliberately, evenly. All 10 of them, like something had been carefully working them back, one by one, night after night. When Emma asked what happened, her sister looked down at her own hands like she was seeing them for the first time and said very quietly, "She said I wasn't allowed to touch the wall unless I paid for it. Emma asked who she was.
Her sister's face went completely blank, and she said, "There's no one in here. Why would you ask that?" and shut the door. That night, the voices came back louder than ever. Emma said she could make out, for the first time, what the second voice was saying. It was repeating a string of numbers, over and over, in that same flat rhythm. She wrote them down out of sheer panic, not knowing why.
The next morning, she looked them up. They matched, almost exactly, the classification code once used to mark a room for terminal patients in an old psychiatric annex that had stood on that same block decades before the apartment building was constructed.
On day 14, her sister came out of the room, tested negative, hugged her, and acted completely normal. No memory, she claimed, of any conversation, any voice, any numbers. Her fingernails had healed strangely fast, Emma said, faster than they should have.
The two of them don't share a wall anymore. Emma moved out 3 months later. She told me the last thing she ever heard through that wall, right before she left for good, wasn't a voice at all. It was someone quietly counting down from 14. 2 stories now. A breath that matches your own. A voice that only exists on one side of a wall. Both of them, notice, happened in places built for people to disappear quietly. A hospice, an old psychiatric annex. The last story is the one I almost didn't include. It was sent to me with photographs I chose not to describe in detail, and a warning from the person who sent it that they still don't leave their curtains open at night. This is the cabin at mile marker 9. This story comes from a man I'll call Marcus, from a rural area in the northern United States. In early 2021, his state was running a program for mandatory quarantine in remote, government-managed cabins for people who had no safe way to isolate at home. No separate bathroom, no separate entrance, nothing. Marcus lived with an elderly grandmother, so when he tested positive, he was assigned to a cabin roughly 40 minutes outside of town, at a location he only ever knew as mile marker 9. He said there were 6 cabins in total, spaced maybe 100 yards apart, deep enough into the woods that he couldn't see any of the others from his window. Supplies were dropped once a day by a state worker who never got out of the truck, just left a box at the end of the gravel path and drove off. The first few nights were quiet. Too quiet, he said. The kind of quiet where you start hearing your own heartbeat.
On night 5, he heard something dragging across the roof. Not footsteps, dragging. Slow, heavy, uneven. Like something with more weight on one side than the other, pulling itself from one end of the cabin to the other. It took almost 4 full minutes to cross. He said he counted, lying frozen in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching a very faint sag appear and disappear in the wood paneling above him as the weight passed overhead. When it reached the far side, it stopped, and then, directly above where his bed was positioned, he heard it lie down. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, he checked outside. No tracks in the mud around the cabin. No branches disturbed on the nearby trees. Nothing. He called the emergency line listed on his intake paperwork the next day and asked if there was wildlife in the area. Bears, maybe? Something that explained the weight on the roof. The woman on the phone paused for a strange length of time before telling him, flatly, that Cabin 6, his cabin, had been flagged for structural review the previous winter and wasn't supposed to be in the rotation. She said she'd note it and hung up before he could ask what that meant. That night, the dragging came again, but this time, halfway across the roof, it stopped directly above him, and he heard, unmistakably, a second, smaller set of movements join it, lighter, faster, like something crawling in tight, frantic circles around the first, larger weight. He said it sounded like 2 things, and one of them, he was almost certain, was trying to get away from the other. On day 9, curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of him, and he searched the cabin more carefully in daylight.
Behind a loose panel in the closet, he found something scratched into the wood, deep enough that fingers had clearly bled doing it. Not words, tally marks. 14 groups of them, each group exactly 14 marks long, like someone had counted out this exact quarantine over and over, cabin after cabin, year after year, long before COVID ever existed.
Underneath the last group, barely legible, someone had carved, "It counts with you." That night was the worst of it. The dragging came at exactly the same time. He'd started keeping a log by then, and it was always 2:51 a.m., never a minute off. But this time, it didn't stop above his bed. It stopped directly above the front door.
And then it began to drag itself, very slowly, down the outside wall. He heard it descend past his window. He did not look, he told me. He has never regretted anything more than not looking, but he also has never wanted to see anything less. And settle, finally, on the small wooden porch, directly outside his door. Then, silence for almost an hour, and then 3 slow, deliberate knocks, followed by a voice, flat, without breath behind it, using his exact tone, his exact way of speaking, calling his own name back to him through the door, like it was trying the sound of it out for the first time. He didn't answer. He sat with his back against the far wall until sunlight came through the window, at which point the sounds simply stopped, as they had every previous morning. He was released on day 14, tested negative, driven back into town by the same silent state worker. He asked her, as casually as he could manage, how long Cabin 6 had been in use. She told him it hadn't been, not for 11 months. Cabin 6 had been closed after the previous occupant was found unresponsive inside, having never once tested positive for anything, on the 14th day of a mandatory isolation that, according to the paperwork, he should not have survived to complete. Marcus said the intake worker had made a clerical error assigning him there. He said the state apologized. He said they offered him a small compensation payment and asked him to sign paperwork agreeing not to discuss it. He signed it. He told me the story anyway, 3 years later, because he said the counting hasn't stopped. He still hears it some nights. 14 taps, then nothing. 3 stories, 3 countries, 3 completely different kinds of isolation. A hotel, an apartment wall, a cabin in the woods, and in every single one, something learned to count to 14, right alongside the person trapped inside. I don't know what any of it was. I don't think the people who lived through it do either. Maybe isolation just makes room for things that were always there, quietly waiting for someone to finally stop making noise. If you made it this far into the video, you already know what I'm going to ask. Tell me in the comments which story got to you the most. Room 214, the wall, or the cabin. And if you've ever gone through mandatory isolation yourself, I'd genuinely like to hear what you heard. Subscribe, ring the bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. And if you're ever counting down days alone in a room, try not to count out loud.